This is Beyond the Call, Medal of Honor Stories, the Monday feature of Dispatch U.S. Military History magazine developed by trackpads.com. Before we continue, I want to mention the Medal of Honor book series that accompanies this work. These books tell the stories of America's Medal of Honor recipients in a serious, readable, and historically grounded format, with each volume focused on a specific campaign, battle, or part of the war. They are available in color paperback, Kindle ebook, and matching audiobook editions. You can find them at militaryauthor.me. Today, we travel beneath the surface of Pearl Harbor, into the dark, cold mud under a sunken landing ship, to tell the story of a Navy diver whose courage never saw a battlefield in the usual sense, but whose sacrifice stands alongside the most famous acts of the Second World War. This is the story of Boatswain's mate second class Owen Francis Patrick Hammerberg, a quiet young man from Michigan who went down for his shipmates and did not come back. By February of 1945, Pearl Harbor had, in many ways, moved on from the devastation of December 7th. The shattered battleships had been raised, repaired, or written off. New ships came and went with a regular rhythm, loading fuel, ammunition, and men before heading west into the Pacific. But in a corner of that vast base, in a side channel called West Loch, the harbor still carried the scars of another, less well-known disaster. Months before, while tank landing ships were loading ammunition for the island campaigns, a chain of explosions had ripped through the anchorage. Several LSTs had sunk where they lay, torn open and driven down into the harbor mud. Those wrecks were more than an eyesore. They blocked the channel and threatened to become permanent obstructions in one of the Navy's most important bases. Clearing them was not a job for big cranes alone. It was a diver's problem. Steel hulls twisted and half buried. Decks collapsed. Compartments filled with muck instead of water. Navy salvage teams were tasked with going down, carving tunnels under the wrecks, cutting them into manageable pieces, and helping the surface crews haul them away. The water was about 40 feet deep, with another 20 feet of thick harbor mud below it. In that environment, even simple movements became exhausting, and every job had to be done by touch. That was the world in which Owen Hammerberg worked. He had been born on May 31st, 1920, in the small northern town of Daggett, Michigan, and had grown up largely in Flint, an industrial city that was part of the great manufacturing engine of the Midwest. He enlisted in the United States Navy in June of 1941, months before Pearl Harbor pushed America into full-scale war. His early service took him to a battleship and then to a minesweeper, where he learned the fundamentals of seamanship and the constant, quiet vigilance required to stay alive at sea. From there, the Navy selected him for deep-sea diving school. Training took place in Washington, D.C., and demanded a very particular blend of skills. Divers had to be physically strong enough to carry and work in heavy gear, technically competent with pumps, air systems, and tools, and mentally steady enough to stay calm when they could not see their own hands. They learned to descend by stages, clear their ears, control their buoyancy, and communicate with the surface by tugs on a line. They practiced working in low visibility, handling cutting torches, and navigating tight spaces where a fouled hose or snagged lifeline could be fatal. Hammerberg completed that course and emerged as a qualified Navy diver, part of a small community of specialists. With those qualifications, he was assigned to a mobile diving and salvage unit in the Pacific. These units were the Navy's underwater problem solvers. They raised sunken craft, patched holes, cleared harbors, and recovered equipment. Their work rarely made headlines, but without them many ports would have remained unusable, and many damaged ships would have been total losses. By early 1945, Hammerberg's unit was operating at Pearl Harbor, and he found himself working in the cold, murky waters of West Loch, helping to clear the wreckage left by the earlier explosions. The divers' method under the sunken landing ships was as simple as it was hazardous. Wearing heavy suits and helmets, they dropped down beside the wreck and then crawled under its side, into the mud. They carried jet nozzles, which were essentially high-pressure hoses that blasted water into the silt. By directing the jets, they could turn the mud into a slurry, washing it away to slowly carve a tunnel under the hull. This allowed the wreck to settle into a more stable position or created space for cutting gear and lifting chains. The work was done almost entirely by feel. Visibility was near zero, and the divers advanced inch by inch along jagged steel and shifting earth. On the morning of February 17, 1945, a team of divers was working under one of the buried landing ships when the worst happened. Somewhere beneath the hull, a section of twisted steel and liquefied mud gave way. The tunnel they had opened collapsed. On the surface, the men tending the lines saw the divers' lifelines go slack, then pull taut, then transmit confused, irregular signals before going still. In a matter of seconds, 2 divers had disappeared under a mix of mud and steel, trapped in a tunnel that no longer led back to the open water. When the situation was explained to the salvage team, everyone understood the stakes. The tunnel was unstable. There was a real chance that any rescuer would be buried as well. The men who had gone missing were somewhere overhead or ahead, entangled in their own hoses and lines. To find them, another diver would have to go into the same narrow space, carve new passages through the mud, and hope that the overlying wreck did not shift again. Among the divers preparing to go down was boatswain's mate second class Owen Hammerberg. By all accounts, he absorbed the risk, stepped forward, and volunteered. Clad in his gear, Hammerberg descended the ladder from the salvage barge into the harbor. He followed the guidelines down to the wreck, and then worked his way under the side of the vessel into the collapsed area. Down there was no light, only pressure and the feel of mud and metal against the suit. With his jet nozzle, he began to wash out a new path, forcing water into the packed silt, creating just enough space to move. The slurry shifted behind him, threatening to close off his path back. But he kept advancing. After painstaking effort, he reached the first trapped diver. The man was pinned and tangled, his lifeline and air hose snarled in wreckage. In that cramped tunnel, Hammerberg relied entirely on touch. He followed the lines with his gloved hands, cutting and freeing where needed, careful not to sever the air supply. Bit by bit, he cleared the way, then guided the man back along the newly opened passage. On the surface, the team saw movement in the lines and pulled, bringing the first trapped diver up alive. 1 life had been saved, against long odds. For most people, that might have been enough. The tunnel was still unstable. Everyone knew that further digging could trigger another collapse. But 1 diver remained missing under the wreck. Hammerberg signaled that he would go back. He turned again toward the dark, flooding the mud with his jet nozzle and inching deeper beneath the hull. Each foot forward meant more stress on the already weakened supports. Each movement of his weighted boots risked shifting unseen beams or sheets of steel. Still, he continued toward the last known position of his shipmate. He was almost directly over the second man when it happened. A heavy piece of wreckage, undermined by all the washed-out mud, broke loose and dropped. Driven by gravity and the weight of the ship above, it came down through the slurry and slammed into Hammerberg, pinning him against the diver he had been trying to reach. The impact drove him into the mud, trapping his body in the wreckage. In that terrible instant, though, something crucial occurred. Hammerberg's body and gear absorbed the blow. The weight settled across him and formed a partial shield over the man beneath, leaving just enough space for the trapped diver to survive. On the surface, the salvage crew could not see the exact situation. They only knew that their rescue diver was not coming back up, and that the lines now reported a confused tangle of force and resistance. Over the next hours, additional divers and surface crews fought their way back into the wrecked area. They had to balance speed with caution, forcing new gaps into the mud, cutting through steel, and trying not to trigger yet another collapse. It was grueling, dangerous work. When they finally reached the location of the 2 divers, they found that the second trapped man was alive, still in the narrow pocket of space protected by Hammerberg's body. Hammerberg himself had died under the crushing weight and the strain of the entrapment. He gave his life there in the darkness, under a sunken landing ship in a quiet corner of Pearl Harbor, so that another sailor could still breathe. The scene bore none of the outward drama of a landing under fire or a charge across open ground, yet the underlying reality was the same. He had knowingly moved into mortal danger to save others and had remained there until the effort cost him everything. In the months that followed, the Navy recognized what had happened at West Loch. There had been no enemy gunfire, no shells bursting overhead, but the standard that defined the Medal of Honor had clearly been met. Hammerberg had displayed cool judgment, professional skill, and a consistent disregard for his own safety in the service of others. First, in rescuing 1 trapped diver, and then in attempting to rescue a second. Nearly a year later, in February 1946, the Medal of Honor was presented in Michigan, near the city where he had spent much of his youth. His parents, Jonas and Elizabeth, accepted the award on his behalf. The official citation praised his actions in measured language, noting how effectively he had contributed to the saving of his comrades and how he had given his life in the process. For his family, the medal could not fill the absence left by their son's death, but it acknowledged the full weight of what he had done. For the Navy, the award served as a reminder that heroism worthy of the nation's highest honor could occur far from the front lines, in maintenance bays, on flight decks, and under the surface of a harbor. In the years that followed, Hammerberg's name was written into the physical fabric of the Navy and his home state. A destroyer escort was commissioned as USS Hammerberg, carrying his name across the seas during the tense early years of the Cold War. Sailors aboard that ship learned about the man for whom it was named, a diver who had used his training and his courage in one final, decisive act. Back in Michigan, a street in Flint was named for him, a playground in Detroit carried his name, and a veterans post in Saginaw County was rededicated to honor his memory. These local tributes ensured that his story would not fade into the footnotes of history. At his grave in Southfield, Michigan, the inscription records the facts of his service and sacrifice, but understanding his story transforms those words. He did not die in a random accident. He died in the act of shielding another man from death, using his own body as a barrier against steel and mud in a place where no one could see him. That knowledge changes how visitors experience that headstone, and it deepens the respect with which his name is spoken among divers and sailors. Hammerberg's story broadens our view of what wartime courage can look like. Many accounts of valor focus on fire-swept beaches or mountain passes, and rightly so. Yet the war effort also depended on skilled professionals who labored in the background, in hazardous conditions, without public attention. Salvage divers, mine disposal teams, and repair crews faced mortal peril as a matter of routine, knowing that a single mistake could be fatal. In Owen Hammerberg, we see the highest expression of that quiet, technical courage. For today's divers and sailors, his example remains powerful. Modern equipment and procedures have improved safety, yet the core demands of the job are unchanged. Calm under pressure, competence with complex systems, and the willingness to act decisively when a shipmate's life is in danger. When they study their heritage, Hammerberg's name stands as a model of what it means to go beyond the call, to enter the dark for the sake of others, and to stand fast even when the way back is closing. For students of military history, his life reminds us to look not only at the sweeping movements of fleets and armies, but also at the individuals whose acts of bravery occur in places the public never sees. In the story of Owen Francis Patrick Hammerberg, we find a young man who carried his Midwestern steadiness into the most dangerous corners of the Pacific War, and who, in his final hours, chose again and again to put his shipmates first. That choice cost him his life, but it saved others and earned him a permanent place among those who went beyond the call.